Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my exorcism story. Alright, so with this video I'm going to be doing something a little bit different than I would normally do. Normally I go in talking about like a very specific topic and then I might give like personal anecdotes to kind of support that. For this I'm going to kind of work backwards. I'm actually going to give the personal anecdote as the main thing, and then I'm going to talk about several different things in relation to that. So mostly this video is actually about projection and about emotional processing and about fears and how like situations might affect us in ways that are kind of unpredictable. So I very recently begun thinking of this story as my exorcism story. So if we think about what an exorcism is, it's basically where a person gets possessed by a demon or some kind of negative entity, and then a priest has to come in and sort of make the demon leave their body, in a sense. And so if we think about the word exorcism, we'll notice that the word is very, very similar to the word exercise, which is used in a very mundane way, where you're basically like working out, going to the gym, that type of thing. And so it occurred to me while I was thinking about this situation that really the connection between those two things is whenever you're being exorcised by a priest, they're essentially making negative energies leave your body. Whereas when you're exercising at the gym, just generally speaking, you're also expending energy there. So energy is leaving your body. So if we're going to make a really, really general definition of what an exorcism is when energy is made to leave the body. So just generally keep this definition in mind as I tell this story, and it'll make sense as to why I link this story to exorcism. And I only just recently started noticing that there was a link between what I experienced and what an exorcism is. And of course, there's a lot of folklore surrounding exorcism, but I can totally see how, people would reason it as being demons leaving the body. So when I was about 10, I watched the movie Pumpkinhead, right? And if anybody's ever seen the movie Pumpkinhead, it's kind of a cheesy horror film. And this was not unusual for me. I had been watching horror films since I was a very, very small child. I was too young definitely to be watching all the things that I watched. But the reason why I would watch them is because, like my dad, he always enjoyed horror movies, and usually he would just watch the TV just out in the living room, so if I were in the living room, I would catch glimpses of it, and, he'd always try to discourage me from watching it, but that only made me want to do it more because it was like, ooh, I want to show him that I can handle the scary things. And so I would sit there and I would watch all kinds of things and I'd try to pretend like I wasn't fazed by it. And then I would get scared, of course, at night, and but it was always kind of an easy thing to get over. I was never scared for that long, and other than like maybe a few times having to go to my parents' room and ask to sleep in their bed, there wasn't like a really huge problem. And once I got to be like 8, 9, that really even diminished further. And that is until I turned about 10. Now, what I'm noticing looking back at this time period is that when I was 10, I was also going through a lot of like transitions. Like my mom and my dad, they were kind of having a lot of fights about a lot of things, and later on they ended up splitting up, and so I was noticing that that was kind of coming to an end. And then my older sister, she's mentally challenged, and I was starting to sort of realize what the implications were for like my future and having to take care of her when I become like a grown-up and my parents pass away. And then there was this fear of like, oh, I'm going to grow up soon and I'm going to be going to college. Even though I was like 10, I was still worried about that. And this was also around the time of the new millennium, and this was also my last year of elementary school. And so there were big transitions generally happening there too. And I used to watch Nickelodeon a lot when I was a little kid. And if anyone else watched Nickelodeon around the turn of the new millennium, you'll probably remember that they had on a lot of like commercials and like transitions that were all like new millennium focused, and some were fun, but some of them were like really wistful and kind of sad and nostalgic, and some of that was really starting to hit me. And I think when I was 10, I was also having a lot of problems like in school, like I was getting made fun of a lot, and so I was just having a lot of things go on at once. And I noticed at the time that, there were certain things now that I used to cope at the time that I look back and think, well, that's kind of strange. So right around that time, I remember getting like all of these different like trinkets from like yard sales, and they weren't even necessarily like anthropomorphized, and they didn't look like animals, some of them did, but like I like named them, and then I would have to like tell them good night every night and say like I love you to them, and it was like a thing that I had to do to make myself feel more comfortable. And so I think like these kind of little things were things that I was using to sort of make me feel like I had more control over life. So anyway, let's get back to Pumpkinhead. So right during this time of all these transitions, I happened to watch the movie Pumpkinhead. And something about it just really, really touched a nerve with me. And it spawned this like huge, like probably 5 or 6 month long fear obsession with Pumpkinhead, where it was just constantly on my mind and I was just terrified nonstop. And like it was to the point where like I wouldn't ever be able to go to sleep without like the television on, and I would be up to like 2 in the morning. And then some of the nighttime would like I would be in like the hallway just like dry heaving because I was so scared like all the time. And there was this one scene in the movie that really, really got to me, where this lady like walked outside and Pumpkinhead like grabbed his claw down, picked her up by like basically under the chin, and then he was like had her up on the roof and was like dragging his claws across her face, not really to hurt her, like just like there were little scratches, but then just like this look of panic was on her face. And I remember that was like just the moment that I had to stop watching. And so that really scared me because it was like I was finally really registering the idea of human suffering, I think. And so when it came to like walking up underneath anything like an air vent, or like just stepping outside of my house, or anything that happened really after like it became nighttime, it was just like, yeah, I just could not handle it. Like I was just terrified nonstop. But then in the daytime, I was okay with it. And actually, sometimes I would even fantasize that I had Pumpkinhead on my side, and that like during the daytime, Pumpkinhead was like my friend, and it could like help me like sort of almost get more power over all of the kids that were like making fun of me in class. And so there was always this like this kind of like almost duplicity with it. It's like in the daytime I was fine with it, and it was kind of like an interesting thing. But as soon as it became nighttime, I was just terrified of it. And like I said, this was like an obsession for months and months. And what I honestly think is that all of those transitions that were happening and all of the turmoil that was happening essentially got projected onto this character of Pumpkinhead. And so Pumpkinhead sort of represented my own personal demon of sorts. So all of the uncomfortable feelings about what the future held in terms of like, me growing up and having to take care of my sister and my parents splitting up, and then, finishing elementary school and going into middle school, and, the new millennium coming, and just all of these fears about the future and how uncertain everything was and how much more aware I was of these things. Like, I think all of that really ended up going into Pumpkinhead as a character for me. And so I think that that's what Pumpkinhead really represented at the time. And I think that that's why I had such a problem. Oh, and another thing that I almost forgot about Pumpkinhead is how the movie actually starts. So the movie starts with a parent losing his child in, I think, a motorcycle accident. Some like hot rod guy like ends up like being very careless and ends up running over his son. And then that's why the guy goes and he summons Pumpkinhead basically to get revenge on this guy. And then Pumpkinhead essentially like kills everything in its path to get to that person. But then you just see this father guy, and he's like just drowning himself in alcohol, and he's just becoming like a shell of a person and just hating life because he's lost his child. And I know that at the time that really touched a nerve with me as well, because I just was starting to imagine, like, my gosh, my parents, who I see as very, very strong, if they were to go through something like losing a child, like losing me, that would probably be incredibly hard on them, and it would make them suffer a lot, and it would make them, in a sense, now they're strong, they would be weak, and I would have all of these really terrible, like, negative fantasies, like that I really had a hard time sort of detaching from, where I would be worried that, oh, what if I, what if I go to hell when I die? And then hell is just watching all of my family members suffer emotionally and suffer physically, and having to watch them sort of psychologically crumble down. And, I just remember like this always really terrified me. And so I think that that was another reason why I got all those little trinkets and like little animal things that I would name and everything. But anyway, as I said before, like this fear of Pumpkinhead was just really, really intense. And I would always end up in the hallway just dry heaving and gagging and nearly puking every single night, pretty much. And, it was always nearly puking. I never actually puked the whole time, except for the very, very last night of this whole entire obsession. So the last night of this whole entire obsession, I had gotten in that fear state again, and I was again just retching in the hallway. And my mom, she got really upset because she's having to deal with this every single night as a parent. And, she's understandably very tired of, like, me in the hallway, like, just being so scared of this thing. And so she comes out, she's like, come on, Emerald, you got to get over this. Get over it now. And, like, she was upset with me. And, I think from the stress of being scared of Pumpkinhead and then the stress of my mom being upset with me, those two things sort of mixed together and made it to where I could no longer hold back, like, from puking. And so at that point, I just projectile vomited right there in the hallway. And then after I was done projectile vomiting, I cried probably for a couple of minutes, and after that I felt so much better. And what was funny is that after that point, I wasn't afraid of Pumpkinhead anymore. I never thought about Pumpkinhead again. I was never afraid of Pumpkinhead again. I could walk underneath vents without thinking about Pumpkinhead grabbing me up into it. There was no problem. Now, I had always just attributed this to the fact that, well, puking is kind of a traumatic thing for me. I hate puking. And so my thought was that, okay, well, once I puked from it, I had to realize that, oh, maybe this is a bit ridiculous or something like that. But in recent years, I've started to think about the connection between that experience and just, let's say, holding certain traumas or certain negative emotions in the body. And I think that that's honestly what happened. And I think that this is very much akin to what an exorcism is. So essentially, I had my demon in the form of Pumpkinhead, what Pumpkinhead represented. And I think it was all of those things that were just going on at the time, and just not really knowing how to deal with these kind of things, like, not knowing what was going to happen in the future, and just being scared about the future for my family. And, I would sometimes have to spend a lot of times just alone in the garage just thinking about things. And I had a lot of like depression and kind of almost like existential crisis going on. And this was a lot for me to deal with as a 10-year-old. And so what I think is that all of that ended up being projected onto this Pumpkinhead character. And so he became my demon in a sense, and he became the almost like the character that represented all of those troubles all rolled into one. And so that's probably why I was so mortally terrified of him. And so whenever it happened that I was like dry heaving, like I think that this was my body trying to process those emotions, trying to sort of sort through them and trying to get rid of them. And I think finally when that actually happened, that there was a very physical letting go of energy, just like in The Exorcist, or when there's an exorcism where negative energies leave the body. I honestly think that that's what happened when I puked in the hallway. And so I've only just recently begun thinking about this in these terms, but it really does make a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense as to why it was like an all of a sudden, oh, I guess I'm over that Pumpkinhead thing now. And I'm not aware enough now to know, like, if, let's say, maybe at the time a lot of those existential fears and all of those fears of uncertainty went away, because I Again, I only just started really thinking about things in this way, but I also consider that a very high likelihood that I had put away some of those fears, because I know that I wasn't dealing with those fears that summer of after the 5th grade, because I remember having a good time with friends like in summer camp, and I don't think I was really dealing with that issue at that point in time. And I know that I wasn't dealing with it in the 6th grade. And so I would almost say that that situation and what Pumpkinhead represented had sort of passed me because I had let go of those negative energies. So if you've seen my videos about emotional processing, I have one that's called How to Heal from Trauma, and I have another one called How Trauma Works. And I talk about the process of actually sorting through emotions and being able to process emotions, and how if we can't process them, they sort of stay in the central nervous system, which is how we actually experience our emotions. And so they stay there like sort of residually if we don't fully process them. And so what I recommend for that is just to focus your attention on the area that you feel those negative emotions in, or positive emotions, whatever kind of emotions, just to process through them. So if you feel them in your stomach, you would focus on your stomach, or if you feel them in your throat, you focus on your throat. And the reason why is because we have these automatic sort of resistances built into our experience. So for example, just like I would hold back on puking, it sort of works the same way. We sort of subconsciously end up holding back on our emotions and not letting them sort of process fully. So when we focus consciously on that area, what we can do is we can notice when we're sort of holding back, and then we can actually let go of that resistance. And so in a sense, when we let go of our resistance, then that energy sort of naturally and gradually sort of processes through us and sort of expels itself by itself. And then of course, if we look at like other spiritual practices, like if we think about, let's say, Tai Chi, or anything like Qigong, you know, that basically is all about like sort of getting the energy moving in the body, and, you know, either building up energy or letting go of energy. And then we have Kundalini Yoga, which has a lot to do with moving energies through the body in hopes of like creating an awakening experience. And then there's also acupuncture. Acupuncture has to do with switching energy channels in the body. Anything that has to do with the chakras has to do with the movement of energy in the body. And there's even certain types of monks that, you know, they'll like do very, very physical things, and they'll even do things like, you know, try to cough and like flatulate and even like puke themselves, you know, to actually get rid of energies in the body. And then there's, of course, exorcism, you know, the idea of like expelling negative energies from the body. So this is something that you could see across different spiritual practices all over the world. And there's probably tons and tons of other examples. And so the reason why I ultimately wanted to share this experience was partly just for fun. It's an interesting story from my life. But at the same time, I definitely see that there's a connection there between what I experienced and what all those other spiritual practices, like exorcism, have in common. And so I think that energy and body work are very, very important components to a spiritual practice, because if you're only working on the mind, then you're not going to really be able to resolve the issue. But like in my experience with Pumpkinhead and all of the negative things that Pumpkinhead represented for me, you know, it was an instant fix as soon as I puked, because that energy was trying to get out, was trying to be processed. And it was very, very unpleasant while it was happening. But afterward, I felt so much better. Now, don't get me wrong with this. I'm not recommending that you use puking as a spiritual practice. That's not what I'm recommending at all. But I do think that, you know, the idea of body work and, again, removing those energies from the body has a lot of merit. And so if you want to learn more about like processing through emotions or healing from trauma, I recommend you check out those two videos that I recommended earlier, the How to Heal from Trauma one and the How a Trauma is Created one, which I actually made just recently. But also you can look into the other practices that I mentioned before, like anything to do with like a physical yoga of any kind, like Kundalini yoga, Kriya yoga, anything like Qigong or Tai Chi, acupuncture, Reiki, any other kind of energy work like that. is going to help you process through things that maybe you couldn't necessarily get to on the level of mind. So if you're doing something like, I don't know, psychotherapy or self-inquiry or meditation, those will take you as far as the mind goes, but they may not actually help you focus too much on the body. And so I think having a body work element to your spiritual practice, it will be very, very helpful. Anyway, so that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please share this video with a friend if you found it helpful, and click the like button below and subscribe. Also, I wanted to say thank you so much to my patrons for keeping me motivated to make videos every week. And also, if you would like to become my patron in exchange for rewards, I'll leave a link down below in the description box. Also, if you would like to get notifications whenever I post my videos, you can either click the bell icon below right next to the subscribe button, and YouTube will let you know every single time I release a video. Or what you can do is you can go to thediamondnet.org, and there's a little content form to fill out where you just fill out your email address and your name, and I'll send you an email out once a week letting you know whenever I release a video. Well, anyway, that's all I have for now, and until next time, keep becoming more you.